My sister stole my inheritance by manipulating our dying grandfather, but her lavish spending led to a surprising twist that changed everything. For context, I'm a 32-year-old guy named Alex, and my sister, Emma, is 35. We grew up in a middle-class family in a small town just outside of Boston. Our parents, Linda and Mike, worked hard to give us a good life, Mom as a high school English teacher and Dad as a local bank manager. We never wanted for anything essential, but luxuries were few and far between. Our childhood was pretty typical: summer barbecues, little league games, and family game nights. But the real highlight of our younger years was always the time we spent with our grandparents, especially our mom's father, Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe was a legend in our family and our town. He'd grown up dirt poor, the son of Italian immigrants who'd come to America with nothing but dreams and calloused hands. He started working in construction at 16, learning every aspect of the trade from the ground up. By 25, he had started his own small contracting business. Through sheer grit, determination, and an uncanny ability to see potential where others saw problems, he built that small business into Wilson Construction, one of the most respected commercial construction companies in New England. Grandpa Joe was tough as nails but had a heart of gold. He stood barely 5 feet 8 inches in his work boots, but his presence filled any room he entered. His hands were rough and scarred from decades of hard work, but they were always gentle when he scooped us up for a hug. He had this booming laugh that seemed to come from his toes, and a twinkle in his eye that made you feel like you were in on some grand secret. Every Sunday, without fail, we'd go to Grandpa Joe and Grandma Rosa's house for dinner. Grandma Rosa, bless her soul, passed when I was 15, but those Sunday dinners continued. Grandpa Joe would regale us with stories from the job site, teach us the finer points of building a birdhouse or fixing a leaky faucet, and always remind us of his life philosophy: hard work and integrity, kids. That's the foundation of success. You build on anything else, and your whole life will come crumbling down. As we grew older, Emma and I took different paths in life. I was always fascinated by Grandpa Joe's stories and would beg to visit job sites with him. The smell of sawdust and the rhythmic pounding of hammers was like a symphony to me. It wasn't a surprise to anyone when I announced that I wanted to follow in Grandpa Joe's footsteps. After high school, I enrolled in a construction management program at the local community college. Summers and weekends were spent working as a laborer for Wilson Construction. Grandpa Joe didn't cut me any slack. If anything, he was tougher on me than on any other employee. "I'm not going to hand you anything, Alex," he'd say. "You want to succeed in this business, you gotta earn it." And earn it I did. I started as a laborer, then moved up to carpenter, foreman, and eventually project manager. Every promotion was hard-won, every skill honed through sweat and sometimes blood. I still have a small scar on my left hand from an overzealous attempt to prove I could handle a circular saw at 19. Emma, on the other hand, always had stars in her eyes. From a young age, she was captivated by the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Her room was plastered with posters of movie stars, and she'd spend hours in front of the mirror, practicing acceptance speeches for awards she hadn't won yet. In high school, Emma was the lead in every play, the life of every party. She was beautiful, charismatic, and always seemed to be at the center of attention. While I was happy in my sturdy work boots and flannel shirts, Emma longed for designer labels and red carpet events. After high school, Emma headed off to NYU, dead set on becoming an actress. Mom and Dad scraped together what they could for tuition, and she won a partial scholarship, but student loans covered the rest. Those 4 years were a whirlwind of showcase performances, indie film auditions, and networking parties. When Emma graduated, she was convinced her big break was just around the corner. She stayed in New York, bouncing between waitressing gigs and unpaid internships at production companies. Every few months, she'd call home bursting with excitement about a callback or a small role in an off-Broadway play. Meanwhile, I was building a life back home. At 24, I met Sarah at a friend's barbecue. She was a kindergarten teacher with a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that made my heart skip a beat. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of bad puns and good beer. A year later, we were married in a small ceremony in Grandpa Joe's backyard. Emma flew in for the wedding, turning heads in a dress that probably cost more than our entire catering budget. She gave a beautiful, tearful speech at the reception about how happy she was for us, but I couldn't help noticing a hint of something else in her eyes: envy, maybe, or regret. Sarah and I bought a modest starter home and threw ourselves into renovating it. Nights and weekends were spent painting walls, refinishing floors, and slowly turning the little fixer-upper into our dream home. When our son, Joey, named after Grandpa Joe, of course, came along a year later, our happiness felt complete. Life wasn't always easy. Construction work can be feast or famine, and there were some lean months where we had to tighten our belts. But we were happy. We had each other, a roof over our heads, and a beautiful little boy who filled our days with joy and our nights with less sleep than we'd like. Emma's life, from what we could gather from her sporadic calls and social media posts, was a roller coaster. She'd land a small role and be on top of the world, certain that this was her big break. Then months would go by with nothing but rejection, and her posts would become infrequent and melancholy. She started dating a string of men who all seemed to be producers or directors, though none of their IMDb pages ever seemed to have more than 1 or 2 credits. Each relationship burned bright and fast, ending in dramatic breakups that Emma would dissect in long, wine-fueled phone calls to Mom. Despite the distance and our different lifestyles, I still cared deeply for my sister. I worried about her alone in the big city, chasing a dream that seemed to be always just out of reach. I suggested a few times that she might want to come home, maybe try teaching drama at the local high school. But Emma would hear none of it. "I'm not giving up," she'd insist. "My big break is coming. I can feel it." Things started to change about 3 years ago. I got a call from Mom one evening, her voice shaky as she told me that Grandpa Joe had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him about a year to live. It felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Grandpa Joe had always seemed larger than life, invincible. The idea of him being sick, of losing him, was almost impossible to comprehend. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's appointments and family meetings. Grandpa Joe, true to form, faced his diagnosis with the same grit and determination he'd approached everything in life. "Well," he said, after the doctor had laid out the treatment options, "looks like I've got one last big project to tackle." We all rallied around him. Mom took a leave of absence from teaching to help with his care. Dad started spending his lunch breaks at Grandpa Joe's house, often bringing him updates on the Red Sox games he was too tired to stay up and watch. Sarah and I would bring Joey over a few times a week, the sight of his great-grandson never failing to bring a smile to Grandpa Joe's face. Emma flew home as soon as she heard the news. She moved back into her old room at our parents' house, saying she wanted to be close to help out. At first, I was touched by her dedication. She'd spend hours sitting with Grandpa Joe, bringing him his favorite snacks and regaling him with stories of her life in New York. But as time went on, I started to notice something off about her behavior. She'd always find a way to be alone with Grandpa Joe, shooing away other family members or the hospice nurses. She'd whisper to him and giggle like they shared some secret joke. At the time, I brushed it off as her way of coping with the impending loss. About 6 months into Grandpa Joe's illness, he called a family meeting. We all gathered in his living room, Mom, Dad, Emma, and me. Sarah stayed home with Joey, sensing this was something just for the immediate family. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something big was about to happen. Grandpa Joe was propped up in his favorite armchair, a plaid blanket over his legs. He'd lost a lot of weight, and his once robust frame seemed to have shrunk. But his eyes were as sharp as ever as he looked at each of us in turn. "I've lived a good life," he began, his voice weaker than I remembered but still carrying that note of authority. "And I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I always believed in leaving something behind for the next generation, but I also believe that wealth should be earned, not handed over on a silver platter." He went on to explain that he had originally planned to split his estate equally between my parents, Emma, and me. A lump formed in my throat. I'd never given much thought to Grandpa Joe's money. He'd always been generous with us, but he'd also instilled in us the value of making our own way. But now, facing the reality of his mortality, I realized that his estate must be substantial. The company alone was worth millions. Then came the bombshell. Grandpa Joe announced that he had decided to make a change to his will. He was leaving the bulk of his estate, including his company shares and most of his liquid assets, to Emma. The room went silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Emma, on the other hand, feigned surprise, but I could see the triumphant gleam in her eyes. My parents were visibly shocked but remained silent out of respect for Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe continued, "Emma has shown me that she has big dreams and the drive to make them happen. I believe this inheritance will give her the boost she needs to realize her potential." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emma, with her reckless spending and lack of work ethic, was being handed the keys to the kingdom. Meanwhile, I had worked my ass off for years, following in Grandpa Joe's footsteps, only to be left with a pittance. As soon as the meeting was over, I cornered Grandpa Joe in private. "What are you thinking?" I demanded, my voice shaking with emotion. "Emma doesn't know the first thing about running a construction company. She's never shown any interest in the business. And what about all the years I've put in, learning every aspect of the company from the ground up?" Grandpa Joe looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "Alex," he said gently, "you've already proven that you can make it on your own. You've built a good life for yourself and your family. Emma. She needs this opportunity. She has so much potential, but she just needs a little help to get started." I tried to argue, to make him see reason, but he was adamant. He truly believed that Emma had changed and that she would use the inheritance wisely. I could see that Emma had successfully manipulated him, playing on his emotions and his deteriorating mental state. But there was nothing I could do. The decision had been made. The next few months were tense. Emma strutted around like she already owned everything, while I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. I was angry, hurt, and felt betrayed not just by Emma, but by Grandpa Joe too. The man who had always preached about the value of hard work was handing everything over to the person in the family who had worked the least. My relationship with Emma deteriorated rapidly. Every time I saw her, all I could think about was how she had manipulated our dying grandfather. We'd bicker constantly, over big things and small. More than once, Sarah had to step in to prevent our arguments from turning into full-blown shouting matches in front of Joey. When Grandpa Joe passed away 2 months later, the family was torn apart. The reading of the will confirmed what we already knew: Emma was set to inherit almost everything, with only small bequests left to my parents and me. The company I had poured my heart and soul into for years would soon belong to my sister, who had never shown the slightest interest in construction beyond complaining about the dust on her shoes when she visited a job site. I considered contesting the will. I spoke to a lawyer friend who said we might have a case, given Grandpa Joe's declining health when he made the changes. But my parents talked me out of it. They said it would only cause more pain and division in the family, that it wasn't what Grandpa Joe would have wanted. Reluctantly, I agreed to let it go, but my relationship with Emma was irreparably damaged. As soon as the inheritance came through, Emma's true colors showed. She quit her job, a small role in a toothpaste commercial she'd been ridiculously proud of, and embarked on a lifestyle that would make a Kardashian blush. Designer clothes, luxury cars, first-class trips around the world, you name it, she bought it. Her Instagram, once a sporadic collection of audition selfies and artsy shots of New York street scenes, became a non-stop barrage of wealth porn. Emma on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Emma shopping on Rodeo Drive. Emma partying with D-list celebrities at exclusive clubs. To add insult to injury, she decided to keep the company, but showed zero interest in actually running it. She hired a management team to handle day-to-day operations, while she played at being a socialite. I stayed on as a project manager, swallowing my pride because I couldn't bear to leave the company Grandpa Joe had built. But every day was a struggle, watching outsiders run the business I knew like the back of my hand. At first, I was bitter. Every time I saw her flaunting her new wealth on social media, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I'd come home from long days at work, my hands rough and my back aching, to see new photos of Emma sipping champagne on some exotic beach. The unfairness of it all threatened to consume me. But as months passed, something unexpected started to happen. While Emma was burning through her inheritance at an alarming rate, Sarah and I focused on what we had always done, working hard and living within our means. We had our struggles, sure, but we faced them together. Our love grew stronger, and our little family flourished. Joey was growing into a kind, curious little boy, with Grandpa Joe's mischievous twinkle in his eye. Sarah and I had our second child, a daughter we named Rosa, after Grandma. Life was full of small joys: Joey's first day of school, Rosa's first steps, lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes and cartoons. Meanwhile, cracks were starting to show in Emma's facade of perfection. Her posts became less frequent, and when they did appear, there was a manic quality to them. She was trying too hard, her smiles a little too wide, her captions a little too insistent about how amazing her life was. I heard through the grapevine that she'd had a falling out with the management team at the company. Profits were down, and there were whispers of unethical practices. I thought about reaching out, offering to help, but my pride held me back. She'd made her bed, I thought. Let her lie in it. About a year after Grandpa Joe's passing, Emma showed up at our door unannounced. It was a Sunday morning, and Sarah and I were in the backyard, watching Joey help me build a treehouse. The doorbell rang, and Sarah went to answer it. A few moments later, she called out to me, an odd note in her voice. I climbed down from the half-finished treehouse to find Emma standing in our living room. She looked haggard, a far cry from the polished image she usually presented. Her designer clothes looked rumpled, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, to my shock, Emma burst into tears. Between sobs, she confessed that she had made a huge mistake. It all came pouring out: how her lavish spending had spiraled out of control, how she'd blown through a significant portion of her inheritance in just a year. But that wasn't the worst of it. In her desperation to maintain her lifestyle, she had made some risky investments that had backfired spectacularly. She'd gotten involved with a group of so-called financial gurus who promised incredible returns. It turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate Ponzi scheme, and Emma had lost millions. "I'm on the verge of bankruptcy, Alex," she sobbed. "The company. Grandpa Joe's company. I've run it into the ground. The management team quit last month. There are lawsuits pending. I don't know what to do." Part of me wanted to turn her away, to let her face the consequences of her actions. After all, hadn't she stolen my inheritance? Hadn't she manipulated our dying grandfather? But then I remembered something Grandpa Joe used to say: family is family, through thick and thin. With a heavy sigh, I invited Emma to sit down. Sarah, bless her heart, took one look at the situation and quietly ushered Joey upstairs for his nap, giving us space to talk. Over the next few hours, Emma and I talked more openly and honestly than we had in years. She broke down completely, admitting to how she had manipulated Grandpa Joe. "I was so desperate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd failed at everything I'd tried in New York. I was drowning in debt. When I came home and saw how successful you were, how happy, I was jealous. I thought if I just had some money, I could turn my life around. Make something of myself." "And did you?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness entirely out of my voice. Emma laughed hollowly. "God, no. I thought I was finally living the life I deserved. But it was all so empty. The parties, the travel, the stuff. None of it made me happy. And now it's all gone, and I've destroyed Grandpa Joe's legacy in the process." As angry as I was, seeing my sister so broken stirred something in me. I thought about all the times she'd stood up for me when we were kids, how she'd helped me ask out my first girlfriend, how she'd been the first person I called when I decided to propose to Sarah. "It's not all gone," I said finally. "The company can be saved. It won't be easy, but if we work together, we might be able to turn things around." Emma looked at me, hope and disbelief warring in her eyes. "You'd help me? After everything I've done?" "I'm not doing it for you," I said, my voice firm. "I'm doing it for Grandpa Joe. For his legacy. And for the employees who depend on the company for their livelihoods." It wasn't an easy conversation, and there were moments when old resentments flared up. But by the end of it, we had reached an understanding. I agreed to help Emma, but on one condition: she had to take responsibility for her actions and make real changes in her life. The next few months were some of the hardest of my life. Emma moved into our guest room, a far cry from the luxury penthouses she'd been used to. Every day was a struggle, both at home and at work. At the company, we were in crisis mode. I called in every favor I had, worked 18-hour days, and put every ounce of knowledge I'd gained over the years into saving Grandpa Joe's legacy. Emma was right there beside me, learning the business from the ground up, just as I had. There were times when I thought we wouldn't make it. Creditors were circling, contracts were being cancelled, and our reputation in the industry was in tatters. But slowly, painfully, we started to turn things around. Emma surprised me with her dedication. Gone was the flighty, self-absorbed woman who had manipulated our grandfather. In her place was someone determined to make amends, to learn, to work harder than she ever had before. She started in the office, answering phones and filing paperwork. But she was a quick learner, and soon she was helping with client relations, her natural charm and newfound humility winning back customers we thought we'd lost for good. At home, things were tense at first. Sarah was understandably wary of Emma, given our history. But as the weeks passed, and Emma proved her commitment to change, the atmosphere began to thaw. Emma formed a bond with Joey and baby Rosa, often watching them so Sarah and I could have a much-needed date night. She got a part-time job at a local community theater, rediscovering her love of acting without the pressure of making it big. As we worked to save the company, we also worked on rebuilding our relationship as siblings. There were hard conversations, tears, and more than a few shouting matches. But there was also laughter, shared memories, and a growing understanding of each other. About 6 months into this new chapter of our lives, I received a call from Mr. Thompson, Grandpa Joe's longtime lawyer and friend. He asked to meet with Emma and me urgently. When we arrived at his office, Mr. Thompson had a bemused smile on his face. He explained that there was one final piece of Grandpa Joe's estate that had not been disclosed earlier, a significant investment in a tech startup that Grandpa Joe had made years ago. The startup, a company developing innovative green construction materials, had just been acquired by a major tech giant. The value of Grandpa Joe's investment had skyrocketed. It was now worth more than the rest of his estate combined. Mr. Thompson then dropped the bombshell: this investment had been left equally to Emma and me, with one condition. We could only access it if we both agreed on how to use it, and it had to be for the betterment of our community. Emma and I looked at each other in shock. It was clear that Grandpa Joe had one final lesson to teach us about cooperation, responsibility, and giving back. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I spent hours discussing what to do with this unexpected windfall. We reminisced about Grandpa Joe, sharing stories and slowly healing old wounds. In the end, we came up with a plan that we believed would have made him proud. We decided to use the money to start a foundation in Grandpa Joe's name. The foundation would focus on two main areas: supporting aspiring entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds and funding education programs in sustainable construction techniques. We also earmarked a portion of the funds to stabilize the company, paying off debts and investing in new, green technologies. It felt like we were honoring Grandpa Joe's legacy while also pushing the business he loved into the future. As we worked together to set up the foundation, I saw a side of Emma I hadn't seen in years. She was passionate, hardworking, and full of innovative ideas. Her experiences, both good and bad, had given her unique insights into what people needed to succeed. The foundation became a huge success. We were able to help hundreds of young entrepreneurs get their start, just like Grandpa Joe had done on his own so many years ago. The sustainable construction programs led to partnerships with major companies and universities, pushing the industry towards more environmentally friendly practices. Emma continued to work at the company, slowly working her way up the ranks. She found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that all her previous luxury could never provide. She even met a great guy there, a project manager named Dave, who loved her for who she was, not what she had. As for me, the experience taught me valuable lessons about forgiveness, the true meaning of wealth, and the importance of family. Sarah and I used a small portion of the investment to buy a slightly bigger house for our growing family, but otherwise, our lifestyle remained much the same. Looking back now, I can see that Grandpa Joe was wiser than I ever gave him credit for. His unconventional decisions led us on a journey of self-discovery and personal growth that we desperately needed. The inheritance that I thought Emma had stolen turned out to be a catalyst for positive change in both our lives. Her lavish spending and subsequent fall from grace led to a humility and wisdom that made her an incredible partner in our philanthropic efforts. As for the surprising twist that changed everything, it wasn't just the hidden investment. It was the realization that the true inheritance Grandpa Joe left us was the opportunity to learn, grow, and become the people he always knew we could be. Today, Emma and I stand side by side, running both the company and the foundation that bears our grandfather's name. We've helped countless people and made a real difference in our community. Our family is closer than ever, and we often find ourselves sharing stories about Grandpa Joe with our children, passing on his legacy of hard work, integrity, and compassion. I sometimes wonder if Grandpa Joe foresaw all of this. Did he know that his decisions would set off a chain of events that would transform our lives in such profound ways? I'd like to think he did. That somewhere, he's looking down on us with that mischievous twinkle in his eye, proud of the people we've become and the good we're doing in his name. To Grandpa Joe, wherever you are, thank you. We finally understood the lesson, and we're doing our best to make you proud.